999 times it won't. And so while you have, to the original question of operators, owner-operators versus owners and investors, if this is something that you're starting out doing in your world of entrepreneurship, you've got to be an operator. You've got to learn how to run a business.
Welcome back to the Angels, Exits, and Acquisitions podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Barnes. And today I'm talking with Richard Parker, who is a mentor, a coach, a trainer, facilitator for people wanting to buy businesses. He's also bought and sold a number of businesses himself and has some incredible lessons learned and great stories about this, including entrepreneurship through acquisition and growth through acquisition. So if you're a business owner or you want to be a business owner, this is a great podcast, great episode to listen to, because we uncover a lot of the hidden gems and challenges you might face when acquiring a business, when selling a business as well, and how do you actually build wealth with a business. So make sure you check this one out. As always, leave us a comment, like, subscribe, and share. Take care.
Welcome to Angels, Exits, and Acquisitions, the place to learn how to fund, scale, exit, and massively profit as an angel investor or entrepreneur. Brought to you by the Angel Investors Network. And now, here's your host, Jeff Barnes.
All right, welcome back to the Angels, Exits, and Acquisitions podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Barnes. I'm here today with Richard Parker. Richard, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Really excited about this. I know we've had to reschedule a couple times. And, you're down in Florida. Luckily, you weren't affected by the storms too much. So I'm glad and thankful for that, and really looking forward to this conversation today.
Thank you. Same here. We're very thankful, very lucky. Unfortunately, people on the West Coast got slammed, and hopefully the recovery will go as quick as possible. But thank you for checking on us.
Yep, absolutely. And our thoughts and prayers for everybody out there in Florida and the Southeast corridor in general.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Richard, you have a very illustrious career, and you've been essentially buying, running, selling businesses since you were, if I'm not mistaken, 12 years old. So
Correct.
I'm really excited to learn about that story a little bit, but why don't you tell folks a little bit about yourself?
Okay, great. Thank you. And again, I appreciate you having me. So I've been in the world of M&A, which is a fancy word for buying and selling businesses, for 34 years. And as you mentioned, I acquired or started my first business when I was 12 years old, and we can delve into that a little bit. But I've always been entrepreneurial in nature. As a young kid, I grew up in a lower middle class family. I grew up in Canada. I've been living in Florida for almost 30 years now. And I got into acquiring businesses shortly after I started my work career. I was pretty young, 29 years old, when I started my first, what I call real adult business. And that was as a result of having to get into I was in a terrible financial situation that I was 100% responsible for. Blew $60,000 in the stock market and realized the only way I'm going to get out of this mess is to put myself in a position where I wouldn't have any limit on my upside. So I started a business similar in scope to what I was doing before, working for a company. And very shortly thereafter, within probably about 90 days, realized that if I was going to grow this business, even though it sounds like a very short period, the light went on for me that the quickest path for me to grow my then startup would be to acquire some business. I didn't have a lot of money. I had, that's 90 grand to my name. I blew 60 grand in the stock market. So I had 30 grand of which I started and was able to acquire a similar business to bolt on to the one that I had started up. And that started my journey. And it's 34 years later. I've acquired 14 companies and a full range of sizes from 50 grand to a little over $200 million. And I've worked in M&A as a buy-side, sell-side consultant, and also in the investment world with a pretty well-known family office. And so this is the way I forged my path ahead for several decades, all in the world of buying and selling businesses.
That's wonderful. And I'd love for you to kind of tell us a little bit about that light bulb moment, because I know going back to when I was 29 years old, for some reason I thought that, and maybe it's because I lived in Silicon Valley, I thought starting a business would be the greatest way for me to achieve financial freedom and wealth and all of that. And so I have gone on the path of starting well over a dozen businesses. And of course, the startup world is a real with a lot more painstaking failures, unfortunately, than I think just acquiring something successful. And if I would have known what you learned or you figured out really early on, life probably would have been a little bit different for me throughout my 30s. But yeah, take us back to when you were 29. Like, what made that light bulb go on that said, hey, I should just go acquire something rather than grind it out and build my own?
So when I started my first business, again, I was 29. I was a young business owner. And even though I'd been in it for a very short period of time, as I was looking, I wanted to ramp this up quickly. And I was in the manufacturing rep business and small importing business, and was looking at this and saying, if I just focus on trying to go out and acquire additional lines to add onto my suite of services that I was offering, I would be hammering away for an awful long time. I would have to go convince vendors, suppliers, manufacturers that I should have title to their product to be able to sell it. Or if I wanted to develop my own product, that was going to take me a year or 2 years. And then you have a product, but you're really a startup. I mean, you may have landed a product or developed something, but then you haven't done anything with it. You've just got this product, and started saying, why don't it just seemed so obvious to me that, hey, there's these other companies that are doing something similar to I'm doing. There's a couple of guys that are older owners, or they have they may have 10 products of which they're making their living from 4 of them, 6 of them they're not paying a whole lot of attention to. Why don't I just try to buy those particular businesses? Because the second thing that became very apparent to me is the way to grow my business. I was dealing with major retailers and major distributors in Canada. And so it became very obvious to me that I wasn't in the product business. I was in the retail business. In fact, I had to help retailers sell more product. And so for me, it just became obvious, say, hey, it would just be a lot easier if I figure out a way to get more product to sell to the same people. I mean, I had great relationships with my clients. I was always welcome there. I'd always taken care of them, managed their inventory well. And so, hey, this is going to be a lot simpler. Just don't keep reinventing the wheel. I just have to figure out, get more product. I tell people this day, and I sound to be crude. I said, just figure out a way to sell more shit to the same group of customers. Not denigrating my product, but that's the idea. Just establish this pipeline of clients and just force more products into it, because it's much easier. People prefer to buy product from someone they're already dealing with. I remember reading this book, Thriving on Chaos by Tom Peters. It's a very well-known book from many, many years ago. And one thing that I read in there that really resonated with me is that individuals and companies have a 60% higher likelihood to deal with someone they already know, even if they're not thrilled with them, than starting to deal with someone new. And I really thought that I would try to thrill my customers. I did a real good job of servicing, but that really resonated with me, meaning, hey, I just got to find more stuff to sell them. So that's how that whole thought process began. And that led to, instead of, again, just trying to find all this new stuff, just go out and find products that are already available that I could put into my then existing pipeline.
And from that perspective, you're not just acquiring like an affiliate model where they say, hey, you have a cool product, I'll sell your product. You're actually acquiring essentially an entire value stream, right?
Correct.
You're saying, hey, you have the marketing, you have the fulfillment, you have the customer support side of things, you have all this other stuff figured out. And why don't we just take all of that and bolt on to what you were already doing, right? Which is a lot more intelligent. And hey, why don't I go build all the different pieces and parts to this business? I think that's one of those things that a lot of would-be entrepreneurs seem to forget, is that it's not about just the product or the service, like you mentioned. It's about everything else that comes along with it.
Yes.
And, when we're coaching a lot of entrepreneurs, we talk about the E-Myth, right?
Yes,
we
great
talk
book.
about how, it's an amazing book. And it's so smart because, okay, when you are the entrepreneur owner and you're the operator, you're doing all of it, you have to sell. But as soon as you start selling something, if that requires any manual input from you or somebody, if you don't have a team yet, then you have to go do all the fulfillment, right? And
Correct.
the customer support. And if you're doing that, you're not selling, right? You can't do both at the same time. And at Angel Investment Network, we also talk about, you also have to raise capital in certain cases. So if you're raising capital and you're selling and you're operating, when do you have time to sleep even, right?
When you have time to sleep and build a business. I used to work with a guy, his name was Jeff McCarthy, he had a great line. He says, nothing happens till somebody sells something. And that's when everything begins, and not having that infrastructure. And the E-Myth is a perfect example. I mean, I like the original E-Myth versus the E-Myth revisited, because it talks about, duplicating yourself. And, you had alluded to earlier, startups, I mean, they're wonderful, and I encourage people to do them because it's a great learning experience. But if you want to fast track your success, I mean, the idea is, buy something that's already successful. Yeah, there'll be some blemishes, but you already have, customers, you have revenue, you have process, you have systems, you have people. They may not all be perfect, and you could massage them and make them better, but with a startup, nothing is known. Everything sounds great, but you haven't proven it. I mean, most times you don't even have paper clips. So, and you need to have the stomach for a startup. So for people, when you started a bunch of businesses, and oftentimes people don't even realize that you can buy existing businesses. Very often, individuals think, oh, these are just for big companies or rich people, and nothing could be further from the truth. So, when you get your mindset around the fact that this is doable, and it is very doable, and I'm the poster boy for that, it just gives you you have a running start. Past the startup phase. I mean, that's the beauty of it.
And that's so important, right? And now I want to get to that because, and I feel like there's multiple types of entrepreneurs. There's the entrepreneurs, the visionary that has this blue ocean idea, and they're going to go start their own thing, come hell or high water, right? They're the 1% crazy, as people would say, right? And they really, really want to do this. But then there's this entrepreneurship through acquisition model, which is what you're alluding to. And I would really love for you to talk a little bit about that. And what are some of the biggest mistakes you see people make? And what kind of person really would be a good fit for entrepreneurship through acquisition?
Well, it's become a pretty popular buzz term, search funders or searches and entrepreneurship through acquisition. I'm an old-fashioned guy. I still call it buying and selling businesses, but the reality is that's really what it is. So there's a couple fundamental things, and I've been dealing with buyers, or program that we developed years ago. I mean, with over 100,000 clients. There's some fundamental difference. The first thing is people need to understand when you go, while this is doable, you have to have a need to buy a business. It's a very easy process to get lost in and not make much progress. I come across people all the time. People attend their webinars and tell us, and we do these free webinars for people. I've been looking for a business for 2 years or whatever. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's nonsense. I mean, this whole process should take you 6 months beginning to end. You'll be able to buy a business. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind. But they get headed down the wrong path. I see this much more with highly educated individuals, people that have got MBAs from these great business schools, and they've acquired this tremendous amount of education. But the fact is they have no knowledge, and they have no track record, and oftentimes they have no capital, and they don't understand how this world works. They have no operating experience. So the first thing is, when you take those components combined is, number one, you want to acquire knowledge, good knowledge, practical knowledge that you could put to work immediately. In the real world, not some of these misleading advertisements that you see that go along with the explosion of entrepreneurship through acquisition. Get good mentors, get good knowledge. The second piece is you set a timeline, and you have to have a need to buy a business. If you want to buy a business, that's one thing. If you have to have this mindset of, I need to buy a business. You either need to generate an income, replace an income, or you just need to not be willing to do what you've been doing to this point in your professional career. But it's this burning desire to complete this task, because if not, the internet has so much information and misinformation and disinformation. You could spend an inordinate amount of time, jumping around from website to website and not make much progress. The other thing, which is critically important, is you've got to go out and meet sellers. There's lots of businesses for sale, generic business for sale websites. Not most of those businesses won't sell, but it's great practice. It's a great laboratory. You've got to get in front of people, because you need to understand the guts of the business and what it takes to drive the revenue and profits of that business, and make sure that your skill set marries to that. Because the right business for the individual is not necessarily just a good business. It could be a good business, but if you're not the right operator, then it'll go south in a hurry. So all these things, they're really like the overarching thing to all of this is acquiring good practical knowledge that works in the real world. And as opposed to just fluttering around. Like I see, if you give me an MBA from Wharton Business School who calls himself a searcher versus someone who's saved up a few bucks and has, a couple of kids and's got to make some money, I'll bet on person B all the time, because they have a burning need and they have to buy a business. They won't be reckless. It's this real need to get into it and do it and understand it's doable, but you've got to follow a logical path, and and not get put off by or go down the road of thinking it's so easy to finance. It's not that easy to finance. We believe in seller financing, but you've got to get into the hunt. This is a blue collar project. This is not fancy business school project. This is a blue collar project. Roll up your sleeves, get your fingernails dirty, and get into the process. Meet business owners, meet sellers, speak to people such as yourself, speak to people like me, people who've been there, done that, and have a track record.
Before continuing, please subscribe and share this video to help us reach more people and stay notified of our latest releases. Now, let's continue watching and learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so important for people to understand that while it's not hard necessarily, it does require work, right?
Yes.
It's just different kind of work that I think, there's no such thing as an education. Maybe once you get into your MBA, they might talk about private equity and M&A stuff a little bit, but I got my MBA and I took one elective on venture capital, and I think I had one course, one lesson out of the entire MBA program on M&A. Right. And how it all works. And so you're exactly right. You go through. Now, luckily, I got my MBA when I was in my 30s. And so as a result, or almost 30, I guess, as a result, I actually had real world experience because I, was in the Navy corporate world. And so I actually got to apply what I was learning, which was nice because the knowledge stuck with me. But you're right. You get a lot of these folks that go through school. They think the college is the best path. And they go, well, the next thing I got to do is I got to get my master's. So I get my MBA. Then I'll be able to figure all this stuff out. And what they forget is that MBA schools across the country, historically and predominantly, are all about how do you manage really, really big operations as a middle manager, not as an owner, right? And I think that's a really key distinction because in from what I've seen, there are two different types of business buyers. There's the buyer who wants to be the owner operator, and there's the buyer who wants to be the owner investor.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit to that, and maybe there's other ones that you might have seen as well?
The two, I think you nailed the two pretty well. Certainly not being delusional. When you get into this, if you have no track record or experience or what have you, you are going to be the owner-operator. You're doing yourself the greatest favor to be an owner-operator, regardless of the level of success or failure of that first enterprise. Nothing beats operational knowledge. Because for most businesses, unless they're highly technical, you can translate your skills to very different businesses. You've got to get that operational experience under your belt. As far as, a number I deal with PE firms for decades, and it's incredible how often PE firms, individual PE firms, I always ask them, what would you do differently in your career? And almost, unanimously, they'll tell you, some of these principals and vice presidents and partners, that they would have got into operating businesses earlier because it gives you just tremendous insight. And I don't even believe that you could be a good investor without operational experience. If you have tons of money and you have a little bit that you could blow, you may achieve some level of success. But if you're starting out with a reasonable amount of money and you're looking to build your career, you're in your 20s, 30s, even 40s and later, you want that platform, that operational platform. So while it sounds wonderful to have these, you hear a lot of these absentee-run businesses, and generally speaking at the lower end, absentee-run businesses equal absentee profits. You need to know what's going on. It's true. You need to imagine
it's
you buy
so
a business.
True. I'm flipping that one because that's spot on, right? Especially at the lower end, right? Absentee owner means absentee profits. I love that.
Yeah, because imagine you go out and buy a business that's doing reasonably well, and they've got a manager in place, and let's say it's a distribution business of widgets A, B, and C, and they're doing reasonably well, and you invest and you're able to craft a deal and acquire that business and say you're going to be an investor and you're going to have a manager in place, and then you get the key to the place and you effectively just give them to the manager. And what happens if, like, the next day the manager gets hit by a Pepsi Cola truck, right? And the manager, you don't even know who to hire, what to hire, how the business operates. So you've got to get in and understand that business, get the guts of the business in your belly, learn it operationally. Then, of course, it's wonderful if you could, transition out from being a full-time operator and bring in key people and, at second tier of management. That's wonderful. But it's delusional to think that you could do that on day one. It's not going to be effective. Yeah, 1 in 1,000 may work, but 999 times it won't. And so while you have, to the original question of operators, owner-operators versus owners and investors, if this is something that you're starting out doing in your world of entrepreneurship, you've got to be an operator. You've got to learn how to run a business. You want to know something? In 6 months, you'll earn your MBA.
That is not the truth.
The
Absolutely.
legit MBA. Yeah.
Yeah. And let's talk about that a little bit, because I have found that to be so true, right? When you step into business ownership, it is one of those things that no one can prepare you for. No matter how many war stories you've heard, how many podcasts you've listened to, how many books you've read, there's going to be something that is going to come up when you are a business owner that you never heard of, never thought of. It could be an employee coming to you with a personal problem it was completely out of left field. It could be, all of a sudden the tax codes changed, or you just found out that you had debt on the books that you weren't even aware of, or who knows what, right? There's so many different things that can happen when you step into this business owner role. So can you tell us about, I want to hear 2 stories from you. I really want to hear about your 12-year-old story, because I have an 11-year-old and a 12-year-old,
Nice.
and how the 12-year-old became successful, because that sounds awesome. And give us a war story. Tell us about one of those things that was kind of like out of left field for you that you didn't expect in a business that maybe you acquired, if you have any of those.
Unfortunately, I have too many of those. So the 12-year-old, I grew up in Montreal. There used to be a newspaper that you can go pick up on Sunday mornings called the Sunday Express, but it wasn't delivered. You had to pick up at the local store. And if you live through a Montreal winter, you freeze your butt off going out to, in the winter time. And my dad, rest in peace, was an unbelievable guy, but he sent me up to the corner to get this newspaper from him. It sold for 15 cents called the Sunday Express. And it sort of thought, like, why we had 2 other English language dailies in Montreal. They were delivered, and I couldn't understand why they weren't. This Sunday paper wasn't delivered. So I called the Sunday Express, the publisher, and said to him, like, I want to be able to sell subscriptions. And they didn't really do it. I said, well, I'll sell subscriptions, and I want to be able to buy the papers, a bunch of them at a time, and I'll sell them. I'll sell them for 15 cents. I figured I could make some money on the tips. He said, well, actually, we're going to put a program into place. We'll pay you a couple of pennies, like 2 cents a piece for ones that we sell. And I started going out and getting listings for subscriptions from all the local, going door to door. And would you want to get home delivery? Would you like to get home delivery of the Sunday Express? My pitch was, and I still remember, are you the homeowner? And I knew most of the people in the neighborhood, but are you the homeowner? Yes. Would you like to get home delivery to Sunday Express? Yes. How much? 15 cents. Boom. Put down, Mr. and Mrs. Herman. Boom. The next one made my list and got a bunch of them delivered, and suddenly built it up to like hundreds of papers. And what used to happen is the following. I used to get the 2 cents for the paper, but because it was 15 cents, people used to give you a quarter, keep the change. So I used to make a dime a piece, used to make 12 cents a piece. Then what happened is the Sunday Express raised their price to 20 cents. So I was only getting 5 cents because people give you the same quarter, right? And so now my profits dropped all in half. So I started saying, you know what? I'm getting more people that want to subscribe to this. So I started selling off my roads. I had like 1,000 of them. I started selling them off in pieces of 100 to neighborhood kids, and said to them, look, you get the papers, you deliver them, you keep all the tips. I was just getting the 2 cents a piece. Now understand, this is in a time when I was 12 years old.
Amazing distribution model for a 12-year-old.
Oh, it was unbelievable. Yeah, it was 1973. My father was giving me like $1 a week in allowance, and now I'm making 20, right? Okay, it was like I'm the kid walking around with money in his pocket all the time at 12 years old. It was ridiculous. But it was the start of things, certainly for me. So that's my 12-year-old story, and that went on for quite a long time, a number of years. I mean, it really worked out well. At one point, I wasn't even delivering my own papers. I was just taking that 2 cents per piece. So in stories related to your second question, really the stuff that you didn't expect, is I had bought this company. I was looking to buy a translation business. I was really intrigued with translation businesses because they were all done remotely, even well before COVID. People would have a translation business, and if you were a company, Jeff, and you wanted some translation done for a document into Japanese, you could find a translation company. But you would have to look for a company that did Japanese translation typically. Well, it started out probably in about 2008, 2009. You started seeing more of these companies that were aggregators of translation companies, that they would get translators all over the world. They could take some money off the top. So I started looking. I was very intrigued by it. But I actually, through my research, came across the world of legal document preparation for people that were going to represent themselves in court. It's called a pro se litigant. Some more simple cases, the uncontested divorce. Sometimes there's child custody, those type of things. We did some contested divorces. And I found a company, and as it turns out, a friend of mine was, and as I was talking to him, he was working for one of those companies. I ended up buying this company. And what happened, they were getting tons of calls every day, but weren't able to handle the business. Okay. There was an overflow. They're getting incoming like 1,500 calls a day, weren't handling it properly. What I learned, the big thing was they had a tremendous backlog. They had reps and warranties that were disclosed in the contract. And I knew this guy was a little flaky who sold it to me, but I really liked the model. And what happened is we started getting people out of the woodwork that had paid money to this former company and never got their documents. So what would happen is if you were doing documents, and it's complex because you have a state like Missouri, I think it was 42 counties, and there's 42 different documents for like a contestant divorce. So you have to have, we ended up automating the whole business, built a stealth bomber for automation. But the key was all of a sudden, every day, I'm getting calls from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people who they paid for the services to the past person, the owner. They didn't get their documents. So the first couple spoke to the former owner and said, well, there was some seller finance, we'll take that off or whatever. Then it started getting a little crazy. And so I had a choice, which was really go after this former owner, which would have been, I'd probably still be fighting.
Right.
Or take the pill and just tell our team, if anybody calls in and said they paid for documents and they didn't get them, all we want to get from them is the proof that they paid or the proof of the purchase, and we're doing the documents for free. And the document preparers, they would get X amount per file. I said, you've got to give us a break on that because folks, if we don't do right by these people, we'll be out of business because the complaints will be like there would be an infinite number of complaints. Number one. Yeah. Number two, we're dealing with low-income individuals. And they came to us because they couldn't afford a lawyer. And so we need to do right by them. So it was a big pill to swallow. It was a whack of money, and I ate it. And no problem, no regret. But the choice was, do I go after this guy, sue him, and spend years in litigation? Or no, it was a case of, I don't have to be right. I got to do the right thing here by these people. And so that was something that we couldn't account for in due diligence because everything was paid for. Everything was up to date. We had reps and warranties, but some of these things happen. I mean, it wasn't by no means would put us out of business. It wasn't hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it was quite significant. And we had to take care of them. I mean, that was it. You just take care of your customers. So, and I've had that in other businesses, nothing major. You do your mitigation. You do a proper due diligence. I've compiled a list of a 200-point due diligence checklist that tell people to work off of. So you do your best to mitigate everything. You're going to make mistakes. Just don't make big ones.
Yeah, exactly. I love that because it is so true. One, it adds a line on your due diligence checklist of certain things you're going to be looking at, right?
Right.
It always goes in the back of your mind of all these little things. That's where experience comes in. That's why operating a business is so important. And, one of the things that we see a lot in big business, but we don't see it in small business. But I think there's a really big opportunity right now. I know you're a proponent of this, which is, big businesses grow through M&A regularly, right? They acquire a competitor, they acquire a smaller business, they acquire a bolt-on that provides a different service or technology that they don't already have, things like this. I was involved in this in the corporate world for a while.
Right.
And it's really fun to watch it happen. But small businesses can do this too. And before you answer about this, I think it's really important for people to understand the point that you mentioned earlier, which is everybody thinks that you have to have all this money to get it done and that it's, is unavailable to you, which that's also not true because there are plenty of investors out there that want to have a really, really good operator, right? And so if you're a business owner and you've proven that you know how to operate and run a business successfully, and you have an existing business, kind of like you did when you were 29 years old, what would you say to that person about growing through acquisition?
Well, you bring up some great points because the reality is it's easier in the lower end to grow through acquisition than the higher end. I mean, you see some of these transactions, these huge transactions, they take 6, 8, 12 months, over a year to complete and get to the finish line. Growth through acquisition at the lower level is incredibly doable. And by all means, and one of the points that you brought up, which is critically important, is you get these investors, and there's so much capital around, people looking to deploy their capital. I mean, people would rather overpay for something proven than get a good deal on something unproven. And so by that, I mean, they're betting on the jockey, not the horse. If you've got a business, you've got a a renovation business, a lawn business, a distribution business, whatever it may be. And you've demonstrated that you've operated this, you're running it successfully. You don't have to necessarily be making gobs of money, but you know how to run this business. And then there's an opportunity to acquire a similar business, either, a competitive business or a complementary business. And you go to the investment world, institutional investors or individuals, you have a track record. I don't know about you. I'd bet on someone with a track record all day long. When my late partner and I used to look at investments, and we get them every day, we'd get, solicited for investments. So we'd make sure that we like the industry, like the financials. The first thing we flipped to in the deck was always, who's the team? Who's behind this? And so that's the first part, is from people, getting their heads around the investment side. The other thing is, think about it. You're a business owner. No matter what business that you own, you have competitors, I guarantee it. Because if you don't have competitors, you're making so much money, then you probably don't even need to make acquisitions. But you have competitors. And so think about your competitors. Think about ancillary products that you can sell the same customers coming through the door. And that could be as simple as someone who owns a dry cleaner, and you may want to sell them shoe repair services or whatever it may be. So there's some that are complementary, meaning a new service that you could sell to the same customer, or buy out competitors and get them out of business. And, there's a way to do it in a good, confidential manner. But yes, you have to think about that, because it is the fastest path to growth. I mean, I've experienced, there's no question it's the quickest path.
Absolutely. And there's so many different ways. Like you're saying, you can buy out a competitor, you can buy out a bolt-on, you can do all these different things. And the fact is that so many small business owners, I say there's a difference between a small business owner mindset and an entrepreneur mindset. The small business owner, just by nature of the name small business, they almost put themselves in this box and they stay there.
Yeah.
And if you go to a small business owner today and you check out their business, you see how it's operating, you go to them 5 years from now, it's going to be almost identical, right? Maybe a few tweaks and changes here and there, but almost identical. Versus the entrepreneur mindset, which is more of a growth mindset. You go to an entrepreneur who is running a small business, you go back to them in 5 years, if they adopt even a portion of what you teach and a few other things, it's going to be wildly different, right? You may go to this business, it might not even be in the same industry anymore. You're right. I mean, Berkshire Hathaway was a textile company. What is it today? It's definitely not a textile company. It's things like that I think are really important for people to understand, that just because you own a small business does not mean that's where you need to stay.
It's so true. I mean, I have, reams of clients who've attacked it. Now, for some people, having one small business and they're thrilled with that, and that's great. I mean, so if that's good for the individual, but the ability to add on businesses, and you're right, it's a small business mindset versus entrepreneurial. I have one group of clients, they bought a small little company doing a few $100,000 a year, and then bought something else, bought something else, bought something else, bought something else. They ended up building up their company to $100 million in revenue over the years. Sold it, or $200 million in revenue, sold out for $100 million. Now, it sounds crazy, but in our world, as you understand it, Jeff, that actually is not the exception. Like, when we have these sort of conversations, people hear this stuff, say, well, how often does that happen? Well, I'll tell your listeners, it happens quite a bit. It really does, because it's available to happen. This is not delusional. This is not dreaming. This is very, very possible. You have to want it. You have to work for it. It doesn't come easy. You have to be entrepreneurs. The big thing is, embracing uncertainty. There's peaks, there's valleys. You get knocked down a bunch of times, all that sort of stuff. But this is beyond doable. I mean, to grow your business through acquisition and start to think like an entrepreneur. The beauty of this is, the second you make that, when you make that first, second, third acquisition, it's like crack. You're hooked. It's really exciting, because your growth isn't like this. Boom. It's like adding rocket fuel onto
Almost
a barbecue.
overnight.
Yeah, overnight. Yeah. So it really becomes you get addicted in a good way.
So if you're speaking to the business owners out there that are listening to this and they're thinking, oh man, this sounds kind of cool, what is one key takeaway you would give to an existing business owner that would maybe help them move in this direction, or something that you would really want to tell these folks that makes it doable for them?
There's a few things. I think the first thing is take care of your own backyard. Look at your own business. and, run your business like you have to sell it, which means good books and records, proper procedures, whatever. Think about what keeps you up at night about the business, because whatever keeps you up at night about the business, if you ultimately want to sell, is going to keep up a buyer more. But what keeps you up at night about a business, about your business, fix that so that you have a rock solid foundation. As it leads to expansion and opportunity, first thing I'd ask myself, if I could take so-and-so out of business, wouldn't that be great? Who is your competitor? Who's someone who's a distributor? Who's someone with an ancillary product, a competitive product that you could say, if they were gone and suddenly I had their business, how wonderful would that be? And then go and approach them. No matter what size business it is. Again, we use the example of the dry cleaner down the street. Well, their one might be the next town over, and suddenly you buy that and a few more, or whatever the case may be. Who can I take out of business tomorrow? Or what can I add product? What, in an ideal world, what products or services can I add to my existing business? And then find them and make this is as important as fulfilling orders. This is as important as taking care of the staff. This is as important as having good books and records. This could be the ideal marketing play. Ideal. And so when you think about it competitively, think about it when I say ancillary products or service that you can add to existing customers. But sometimes the best exercise I tell business owners is, you think about, if so-and-so went out of business tomorrow, how wonderful could that potentially help my business? You don't wish negative on someone else that they're going to go bankrupt. You're saying, if I could take them out of business and suddenly acquire all their customers, and then go down that road and approach them. There's ways to approach them. I mean, it would take quite a while to get into that today, but there are ways. But look at it from that standpoint of how I can grow my business, because organic growth is it's very gratifying. But if you grow through acquisition, it's much quicker and it's much easier. There's some cultural issues, whatever, it always happens. Transition, not every acquisition makes sense for your company culturally, but by and large, it's infinitely better than trying to grow organically. Sold 2 widgets this year, I got to try to sell 4 next year. It's like not easy versus why don't I just go out and buy someone who's already selling 2 of them? And then I got my 4.
Yeah. Awesome. I love that. Well, Richard, this is something I could talk with you all day about. And we'll probably have to have you come speak at one of our events on this topic, because this is great information. People love this. And there's just so many little nuances to it. But I agree that it's probably one of the fastest paths for business growth and wealth creation through your business as well. So, Richard, I know you coach people, you train them, you have tools and resources and education. Where can people find out more about you and your business?
Very simple. richardparker.com. We've got lots of articles, resources, all the podcasts that I'm on, and free educational videos, our courses there. There's enough information. You can get plenty immersed and plenty smart. Just exposing yourself to all of the articles and information that's there. So it's richardparker.com.
Beautiful. Really appreciate that. So we'll make sure we have that information in the show notes, as well as some key highlights. So if you want to go back and check this out, go ahead and check out all the description in the show notes. This has been the Angels, Exits, and Acquisitions podcast with Richard Parker. Thanks so much for being here today. Richard, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. It was a wonderful conversation.
Absolutely. And as always, like, subscribe, and share, and we'll see you next time. Take care.